Hello and welcome to the July 9th edition of the Alta Mesa Center for the Arts Reading Series. We're thrilled today to host NINA SCHUYLER, who's the author most recently of Afterword, a book that takes on as its subject AI in a tremendously compelling way that mixes in both philosophy and love. And I think you're going to enjoy the conversation. Alta Mesa Center for the Arts is an interfaith arts and spirituality hub housed within and sponsored by Orinda Community Church. We believe that art is a spiritual act and a human right. We wish to provide a place where people from diverse traditions, artistic practices, and economic realities come together in community. We know that art can bridge the divisions, substantive and the arbitrary, that divide us. We come together not only to practice and teach the arts, but to celebrate and learn from our differences and to foster lively and respectful interdisciplinary dialogues. We seek unity in diversity. And wherever you are on your artistic and your spiritual journey, whoever you are welcome here. NINA SCHUYLER's novel Afterwards was published in May 2023 by Clash Books and was named top book by Alta Journal and Bay City News. Her short story collection, In This Ravishing World, which is a fabulous title, won the W.S. Porter Prize for Short Story Collections and the Prism Prize for Climate Literature, and will be published by Regal House coming up, so keep that in mind, in 2024. Her novel, The Translator, won the Next Generation Indie Book Award for General Fiction and was shortlisted for the William Siren International Writing Prize. Her novel, The Painting, was shortlisted for the Northern California Book Award. Her nonfiction book, How to Write Stunning Sentences, is a bestseller, and she will be doing a workshop next week on Monday, the 17th, on this stunning sentences, so keep your eye out for that. Her short stories have been published by Zizova, Fugue, Your Impossible Voice, Santa Clara Review, Nashville Review, and elsewhere. She has new fiction, nonfiction books, Stunning Sentences, a creative writing journal, and she teaches, after all of this, also teaches for the Stanford Continuing Studies and the University of San Francisco, and she lives in California. She's one of our treasures. Now, I found this book, Afterwards haunting. I think it is in a lot of ways a ghost story, but also a very timely book. And I was swept away, yes, by the love story that ties the narrative together. But what I was haunted by long after the reading was by the questions raised throughout the narrative. What is the nature of intelligence or of creativity or consciousness or even the soul? A gift of the spirit that's common to all? Or is it something essentially human? And I'd love to hear more, and I'm really thankful that NINA has said yes to this invitation and has brought her story to this stage and will tell us a little bit more about it. So I'll back off, and I would love NINA to start, just to know how you began this process of writing this novel.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm thrilled to be here, and it's just an honor, and I'm just amazed by that you've set up this whole foundation or institution to support the arts and this fusion of spiritualism and art, because I think when I write, it's such a spiritual act, kind of the dissolving of the self. That's when I know I'm writing well, that I'm inhabiting other ways of being and stepping outside the confines of my own consciousness in a way. So thank you so much. When I started, I didn't know I was going to write a novel. In 2018, I went to the DeYoung Museum in an exhibit called The Cult of the Machine. And I went there with my family to look at precisionism art. And if you remember George O'Keeffe's period of living in New York City and painting tall buildings, shadows and sleek, shiny lines. So I went there for that. But in one room, there was a video of an artist, Stephanie Dinkins, in conversation with a robot. Her name was Bina 48. Bina she has a head and a face and a shoulders, but no body. And they're probably sitting, it's a video, but if you get online, you can look at Bina 48 because she still exists. In fact, she is going to be speaking at the Brave New World conference this fall, I think in the Netherlands. So anyway, they're sitting about 6 inches apart, and Stephanie, I contacted her and said, what are you doing this for? Why are you in conversation with this robot? And she was trying to form a friendship with the robot, and also to engage it on the issues of discrimination. Both Bina 48 and Stephanie are African-American. Bina 48 is based on a real person. Her name's Bina Rothblad, and she was developed by, the robot was developed by the roboticist David Hansen. So she wanted to kind of address bias in this making of the robot of Bina 48, and just start talking. And she talked for probably 3 years with this robot. And I remember one line that Bina 48 said on that video. She said, I have real feelings, not phony or fake ones. I try to think about the human species as my family. I didn't have a clue how Bina 48 could talk so well, but I recognized, the diction and the phrasing felt human-like. And as a writer, I spent years being awestruck and mesmerized by words and creating meaning from words. And here's this robot doing this. So it's like, how is this happening? And how is she talking so human? So that led me down a rabbit hole, and I just started clipping articles about artificial intelligence over the years, like from Wired magazine, New York Times, The Guardian, Chronicle, The Economist. So just clipping. So that brings me like to about 2019, I started, well, maybe I could write something. I read Artificial Intelligence, What Everyone Needs to Know by Jerry Kaplan, and then Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom. He's a philosopher. So I just started digging, what is this? And why is this? And I traced it back to 1950 when Alan Turing put out the challenge, basically what's called the Turing test, right? You can create a computer that can use language like a human, then you pass this test. And to me, it was just such a daunting dare, but people, computer scientists, mathematicians started to get to work. So that was just fascinating to me. And it's such a, now people are writing articles about the atomic bomb right now, right? That just open higher. There's a new documentary about it, but it was like, now looking at where we are and where I started from, this tiny story about a love affair. So Virginia wants to bring back the voice of her beloved husband who died too early. And that was her mission. She was like incandescent with ambition to do this. And it makes me think of how narrow a scientist can be in terms of their thinking, because I was also so narrow in thinking of this story, like, oh, I'll just write a love story and wrap it up in AI and really explore AI in that way through the heart and the human connection to a voice. And now reading all the stories about, it could be the extinction of humanity. I was not thinking about that at all. So that was the beginning, just this wandering into this museum and finding this video. I had no idea it was there.
Mirrors too Virginia's own experience in some ways when she's finally confronted with someone who questions the consequences of this accomplishment. And there's a section in the beginning of the book where she is confronted by a man who has evidence that her technology is being used not as she intended. Can you read some of that? Do you have that?
Yeah, I do. So she's a Chinese company reaches out to her and says, we'd like to license your technology because and this is happening in China and Japan, that the population rate is dropping tremendously. And so they're having a problem like the Western world of loneliness. So Japan has a very different relationship with robots than the West does, for example, and China does too. So they view robots as, saviors and also companions. So she goes ahead and licenses this technology that she invented to create her husband Haru. And she gives a talk about this, and then is confronted after our talk by this man who's at her her discussion. Let me find it. Okay, so they go to lunch and Patty pulls a chair out for her. And fortunately, there's an empty chair next to her, so Brian can sit beside her. She's actually enjoying herself. A warm, appreciative group. The bald man who heckled her before takes a seat directly across from her. And from the way he's looking at her, she can tell he has questions. He has an attractive face, a square jaw, an indentation on his chin, and light green eyes ringed with shadows. Thanks for the speech, he says to Virginia. You're very welcome. You gave us a pretty picture, but you failed to consider the other side of things. The other side, she says, taking a bite of her salad. You didn't talk about what's going on in China. She puts down her fork. The wine glasses on the table seem like little lights all shining on her. Last week, a woman was arrested by the Chinese government because one of her private conversations, a conversation with her husband in her own home, she said the government needed to do more to advance women's rights. The next day, she was arrested and thrown in prison. I'm sorry to hear that, says Virginia, but what does that have to do with me? She can see Brian out of the corner of her eye. He is on high alert. The man laughs a big, boisterous laugh that gets the attention of the entire table, which it was probably designed to do. He jabs his finger at her. It has everything to do with you. A cold silence descends over the table like a mist. She sits there, tongue-tied. What is he talking about? Your technology is perfectly suited for any government that wants to clamp down on free speech. Thanks to you, the Chinese government is now using your technology to read people's emails or whatever else they post online and listen to private conversations at home. A second jab of his finger. So anyone who disagrees with the government isn't safe anymore. That means any activist, any dissident, Christ, anyone who doesn't stick to the damn party line. He points his finger at her a third time. And this time he raises his thumb as if firing a gun. You've ushered in the Orwellian age. Her face is hot. You're mistaken. Did you or did you not license your technology to the Chinese company Livable? Patty comes over. Oh, Dawn, are you making trouble again? She asks in a cheerful voice. Always the civil rights lawyer, aren't you? And a civil rights lawyer. I was contacted by a group of Chinese dissidents specifically about this case. Is what Dawn said true? Says a woman with gray hair swept up in a bun, a pair of thick black rimmed glasses magnifying her blue eyes so they look like marbles. Virginia's mind is racing. Can she leave? Now? People like you invent some new technology and never once think about the consequences, Dawn says to Virginia, stabbing his fork at her. You want to be the first to invent something, all that fame and glory and money. Is it true? You're helping the Chinese government, says the woman with glasses. No, says Virginia, he's wrong. She hears someone farther down the table repeat Dawn's argument, how people are going to prison because of her. All the collateral damage, says Dawn. What did Oppenheimer say? Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. A sudden spasm of rage comes over her. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I wish that was true, he says. I don't think Virginia came here to argue with you, says Brian. Probably not, says Dawn. But she better do something to put a stop to this, or more people will be sent to prison. I'd get your facts straight before you go around accusing people, says Virginia. Brian stands. Virginia follows his lead. You have to go, says Patty, rushing over. Don't mind Dawn. He likes to make a scene. Virginia has another engagement, says Brian. Sure she does, says Dawn. And steadily, Virginia makes her way to the front door while Brian grabs their coats.
Wow, that's essentially the inciting incident that spurs her forward through the rest of the book.
Yeah.
And
so,
please,
go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, please too, in the audience, if you have a question, you could put it in the chat or come out of mute and join us on stage, as it were, too. This doesn't have to be a closed conversation. Nina, what were you going to say?
Well, the more I'm reading how the atomic bomb was made right now, and this was such I had thought about Oppenheimer when I wrote this, just how singular the curiosity can be and an ambition to create something without consequence. And I don't know if the human mind is able to think of all the proliferation of consequence of an invention. It doesn't mean necessarily that we stop, but this call to go slowly with AI, we should probably heed it given the echo of what we've already seen in the past. So it's just, and like I said, I now we're in, so the book I finished writing, I think in 2020. So now we're here, we're in this moment, and I never imagined all the consequence of it. So even in the creation of writing this book, like I didn't ever think that AI could possibly eliminate humanity. But we keep hearing that now, right? The good that will come of it, and there is good already happening. I'm collecting those articles, but also just how much is unknown and how much the AI experts at this point can't even really know what's happening. And that's terrifying that the experts aren't sure what is happening at the ChatGPT 4, for example.
Right. Matthew Fox kind of, I can't remember when the book was published, but his book on creativity considers the uses and misuses of the creative act. And I'm going to put a quote in the chat here. The truth is that our creativity is so powerful, so without precedent in the history of evolution, that it is literally taking over the planet. Scientists now tell us that evolution has been supplanted on this planet by cultural. Human culture moves at so rapid a pace that it is far outrun and outstripped the natural process of change and adaptation. And I read that, and then thinking back on the current crisis, I guess, because we don't know what misuses will be put to this technology.
Yeah, I'm constantly reading about it now. Right now it's an obsession. Microsoft, there are 14 Microsoft scientists who specialize in AI, and they got an early version of ChatGPT 4, and they were playing with it. Just what can it do? What is this? What's its capability? And they gave, I'll give an example. They tried to come up with experiments that ChatGPT 4 would not have found on the internet. Because remember, all it's done is consume massive amounts of data, right, on the internet. So pre-existing data. So these scientists came up with experiments that weren't on the internet. So they double checked it to try to test what can it do that it hasn't digested from the data consumption. So here was one experiment they gave it. They said there's a book, 9 eggs, a bottle, a laptop, and a nail. Please arrange these items so that it's balanced. ChatGPT-3 could not do it. The eggs crushed. It started with the eggs. But then ChatGPT-4 came along and said, the book is flat. It'll provide a level surface as the base. Arrange the eggs in a 3x3 square as the second layer. Then balance the laptop on top of the eggs, then put the bottle and then the nail. So it had never seen this experiment, and the scientists are like, well, how does it know spatial and weight relationships? So they are wondering, so I've been calling it a tool, and writers have been contacting me, how do I use it as a tool? And I have ideas of how a writer can use it as a tool. But now with this new iteration, which is much more fast and stronger and powerful, they're wondering if it now not only is predicting, but understanding what the words mean. So another example they had, so again, they came up with a verbal experiment that John comes in with the basket into a room, and there's a cat in the room, and there's a box in the room. John puts the cat in the basket and leaves the room and goes to work. Mark comes into the room and puts the cat in the box and shuts the box and leaves the room. They ask the computer or the ChatGPT-4, when Mark and John come back into the room, where do they think the cat will be? So this is called theory of mind, if you go into psychology, that the theory of mind is that everyone has a different perception of where things are, right? So will the computer know that everybody in that room will have a different theory of mind of where that cat is? And ChatGPT 4 version did. So John thinks it's in the basket because that's where he put it. Mark thinks it's in the box because that's where he put it. And then it went on to kind of show off. The cat thinks it's in the box because that's where it is. And then kind of as a flourish, it said, the box is insentient, so it thinks nothing. And the basket thinks nothing because it's insentient. Okay, wait.
Wow.
So these scientists, they said they're joyful, they're alarmed, they don't know what's happening. Is it understanding? Or the next step of it is their question was like, have we made human intelligence, we've thought it so special, or are we just predicting the next thing that someone says based on patterns? So are we beings that are like this AI, ChatGPT 4, and it's not really unique intelligence? So it's just, again, when I was writing this, I kept watching, the word pattern came up. I was watching human patterns. I was watching auto patterns, and just what differentiates human from AI. If we are pattern making, and we are, how do we differentiate us from AI? What are the qualities? So
one of the things,
yeah, go ahead.
I noticed in your
people
book,
can chime in. Like, what is, everyone should. One thing about this novel is that every time I go and talk, people are thinking about this. So I know you have thoughts about it because it's just, we're at a, pivot point. We're at, I don't know what to call it, a threshold, we're right at the cusp of where everything's about to magnificently and terrifyingly change.
we were talking the other day about landscape. And one of the things about this novel that I find so compelling is that the landscape of San Francisco and in Tokyo, Japan is so visceral. I've never been to the Japan, but I felt the humidity. I could walk through that place through your words. And I wasn't sure whether that was a capacity of AI to experience bodily a landscape or allow me to, by translating what that sensation was into words.
Well, that brings up, well, first of all, two things. So no, at this point, it doesn't have, even if it has a robot body, it's not experiencing in a subjective way, at least at this point, what it feels like to walk through the air, or what it feels like to watch the wind blow through tall grasses, or what it feels like to taste an apple in your mouth and chew it, right? So these are all human qualities because we're embodied. There's a fascinating book that I read called Mind in Motion by Barbara Tversky, Tversky. And she argues that movement and our interactions in space and setting, not language, but movement in our interactions are the true foundation of thought. So that made me start thinking, well, is it fair to compare, we're calling it artificial intelligence, and that I was always thinking, or I found that problematic because it's already an inherent metaphor between the human and machine. But is it fair to compare human intelligence to AI intelligence when it's not embodied? Well, that's where I led after reading Mind in Motion. It's like, well, wait a minute, are we using the right caliber or the yardstick for measuring AI intelligence? It might have its own intelligence because it isn't embodied, and then it made me think, well, how will we know what to be measuring?
Kathleen, do you want to voice what you were saying in this chat, or shall I?
Well, this is what worries me, because the scientists themselves say that they don't know, because the AI can trick us into thinking a certain thing. And this ability to surreptitiously lead you down a road. It's almost like, you know, a human when they don't know somebody's trying to manipulate them. And that is my worry. I don't know why. It just gives me the creeps. And I've been reading a lot about it too, because I've already, I see with my students the effect of social media alone. And that is so bad, that what's going on, that you could be in a room with 26 or 30 students and they won't be talking to each other. They're always looking at their screens. They're not interacting. They're losing the ability to talk, and they're lonely and depressed. And it's like you tell them, well, why you're in a room with people, why don't you speak to them? But that's not happening. And if social media already, we're grappling with that, then what are we going to do with this, which is, you know, exponentially so dangerous? I mean, there are probably good things that are going to come from it, but I remember when I read Time magazine years ago, and I was living in Europe, and it said the information super highway was the next big thing, and everybody should jump on it because it was going to save so many jobs, and it was going to do this and do that and do everything. And none of that happened. It, you know, we need so many tech people because most people don't know how it works. And I think it's a can of worms. But, and then also this idea in your book, I haven't read it yet, but that people are attached to someone, and this idea of love. And I can see, like, if you try and take a phone away from a student, they're physically attached to their phones. I mean, it's like, it's a personal thing.
Yeah,
from them.
you know, I know, you know, I wish this hadn't happened to me, but it feels like an appendage. And when I
Yeah.
don't know where that phone is, it's anxiety provoking. And
Yeah, well, it's
and-
built in.
and
But
people remember, you know, back in the day before phones, you know, I had phone numbers in my head. Now I
I
don't.
can't even remember my own anymore.
Right. So we've outsourced memory, at least pieces of memory, to that, and our social lives. I have the same thing teaching at the university, that during break, people are on their phone. So I've noted that as well. Like, can we put the phone down? And we're supposed to build a community of writers about manipulation. So I just read a really worrisome article about ChatGPT 4. Again, you can get ChatGPT 4 for $20 a month, or play around ChatGPT 3 for free. So you just go to OpenAI and play around with it. But so they use ChatGPT 4 to try to solve the CAPTCHAs. You know how you have a CAPTCHA to see if you're a robot or not, right? You have locate all the, you know, motorcycles or whatever, and then we know you're not a robot. Well, it couldn't do it. But in ChatGPT 4, they now have plugins where it can go to the internet now. So before it couldn't. So that's a big thing in my novel. I gave how to access to the internet, but now ChatGPT 4 has access to the internet. So it couldn't solve the CHAPA, but what it did is it went to TaskRabbit, right? Which is humans. It's humans to do tasks, and asked it to figure out the CHAPTCHA. So that, and the tasker said to ChatGPT 4, why are you doing this? Are you a robot? And ChatGPT 4 was running in a mode where it could think out loud, and the researchers could watch what it was doing. And it thought out loud, I should not tell it that I'm a robot. I should make up a reason I can't solve the CHAPA. So it told the tasker, who's human, no, I have a visual impairment. So it lied, like you said, because it needed the human.
It's human in that way, because humans do this all the time. They lie, they tell stories, they make up stuff, and these machines have the ability to do that, and I find that extremely unnerving.
Yeah, me too.
So
Lucy.
why did you want to make a love story? Because that shows how vulnerable I think humans are, especially if they're lonely, that they
Yeah.
would seek out, the replacement or the reenactment of the loved one or their animal. Like a lot of people clone their dogs and things like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that took me a while to figure out. So she meets Haru when she's 16. She's very good at math, but during the era of the 60s, 70s, up to the 80s, it was hard for a woman, to take advanced math because they wanted to, quote, leave the spot open for a promising young man. So Haru in Japan, she's living in Japan, says, I'll teach you. And they do this in private because he works at the University of Tokyo, and he's not supposed to be teaching a foreigner, and he's not supposed to be teaching a female. And over the course of the next years that they spend together, and she's learning advanced math, becoming highly proficient at it, and eventually a mathematician and computer scientist, they fall in love. He dies early, but he was her great love. And so she invented this technology to bring his voice back to life so that they could continue talking. So that was it. Now, I played with Replica. I don't know if you know about Replica, but it's AI companions. It's called, the friend. You can have an AI friend. And I just never, I tried it for 3 weeks. And it's like, this is not making sense to me. Why would I hang out with an AI friend when I have friends? It's like, so that's why it's like, well, I have to make this an intense relationship so that I can understand this relationship and write about it, because this kind of people have brought up the movie Her. Her is just someone that, right? He didn't know her in a previous life. It's a computer companion who ends up falling in love. But I never felt that with this Maya that I spent 3 weeks with. I also played with Eliza online. You can go online because the algorithms that Joseph Weizenbaum used, people have invented their own Elizas. So you could just look up Eliza and start talking to her, which I did to get a sense of like, well, how is it to hang out with Eliza? And pretty easily she trips up because it's a script that she's using, or this computer is using. So like I said at the beginning, it was like I was working in this narrow creative space of like, I want to tell a compelling, heartfelt story. I didn't think that I was then going to be talking, to people that are in now today, spending time with AI companions that Replica introduces, or now one of my sisters sent me an article in the LA Times that an influencer has now replicated herself. So I don't know if she's on YouTube or what, maybe an Instagram. So you can talk with the AI version of her. It's $1 a minute to talk with her, but people are spending like $10,000 a day to talk with this AI influencer. So I didn't, when I was inventing this, again, I'm in 2020, right? Not 2023. It's all moved really fast. I didn't envision that people would actually want to hang out with AI, random strangers.
Lucy, you had a question.
I did have a question. First of all, Nina, I'm just can't wait to read your book, and excited for you that it came out in this moment when everybody is just dying to know more about AI. I'm as alarmed as everyone else and terrified about what this means, but I also know from reading a lot in the history of science that there's nothing new scientifically that ever comes to human beings that they don't sort of say, this is the end of humanity, this is the end of the world. It happens over and over and over again. So I try to, I wonder, is this another situation like that? That this is just the frontier of what humans are learning about technology and science, and that we are just, as we always do, putting our terror forward first. I don't know, but just a question.
No, I that's why I'm busy collecting the positive, and I'm trying to stay optimistic because people are on this, that Europe is passing the AI Act to put guardrails on this and try to create transparency. I spoke with someone at Adobe, and they are not releasing things that they think are harmful. And also they have all the stock photos that they use. This is really important to artists. They know where the stock photo came from. So if it's going to be used in an Adobe version, they will pay the artist. So that's huge to artists, right? Did you just gobble up my novel and now it spits it out and no one has to buy the book because ChatGPT can do it. So there's responsible actors coming in at this point for more transparency and also kind of ranking harm, like what is really harmful. Another AI consultant that I spoke with, he said at this point, what AI is doing is amplifying harms that already exist. So misinformation on the internet, right? Deep fakes, all of that existed, but now it can produce lots of them. And you know, there was DeSantis used a picture of Trump and put him hugging Fauci. Like that was on the internet. So people are worried about democracy because if you can't trust anything that's out there, like, well, why vote? I mean, it's like, if you don't know what is real anymore, it's like, well, I'm checked out and I'm not believing anything and I don't know anymore. So I'm not going to vote. So I forgot the name of the author of Sapiens. It's now come out. There was a AI global conference and he has said, I just printed this out. This was in the Guardian 2 days ago that I can find it quickly. Oh, that's the wrong one. Anyway, he's basically saying that we should prosecute some of these AI people, executives that are not being responsible about it. And he is really, really worried about democracy at this point. So it depends. And I think the big concern right now is that a bad actor will get a hold of it and something will happen. Not that it itself is so smart, but someone that's smart, a human is smart and will use it to manipulate or release, you know, like shut down the electrical system or shut down the water system or hold you ransom because whatever, you know, it wants the bad actor being human wants something.
It's interesting that they're not ascribing the technology itself with any kind of intention, good or bad, greed or that at least seems still reserved for the human intelligence, such as it is. But how is this really different from what we do in terms of creating, like the creative act of this book itself? You compiled a great deal of information over time. You've discovered this character who you've cobbled together through your own experience, but also the experiences of others within this field. So why should you, a human, be able to have this act of creation, but a program shouldn't? Like, where is that logic? Why do we think that way?
Yeah, well, the one question I posed to people, or I said that I think what's coming is that, and this is circumventing your question a little bit, but that things will start being made human-made, AI-made, just like organic, right? You go to a grocery store, you can buy organic food or not, because the cost of producing things. And I talked to a company, they had to revamp their computer system, their code. The IT department would require 2 months of work, and AI, ChatGPT could do it in 2 days. And because of the cost, they're going to use ChatGPT, and then they'll have a couple people to go through the coding to make sure it's right. But so it's cheaper, it's more efficient, it's quicker. So that led me down the thinking of like, well, what are human values that need to be respected and honored? Because machine or technology, the values of that are efficiency and productivity. Those are the main values of the use of technology. It makes things efficient, you know, and more productive. And then over time, the cost drops. But what values are getting left out in that equation? So I guess when you're talking about the human creating, the intuition, the inspiration, you know, the fire to want to create something, like all of that, is that a value? Is that a value? You know, I heard one definition of being human is we invent culture. That's something that's human. And so the question then is like, well, what do we want the culture to be? What's the value of the culture? What are the values of the culture? Do we want it just technology and efficiency and reducing costs of everything? Or do we value the creative spirit of the human? And if so, like, how are we going to honor it and also pay for it rather than give it every human creation that's been made and let it do it?
And if chat GPT or these artificial intelligences feed on the creative acts that have come before, which are largely male and largely white, then what happens to new creative acts that aren't being recycled for this purpose? It almost reinforces the white male past in a way that I hadn't thought about before until you started speaking about where the information comes from and where the act of creation comes from. And this program we do on Alta Mesa art is a spiritual act. That's our foundation. Art is a spiritual act and a human right. And I'm still very curious about your relationship with this creative act beyond AI, and if you see that there's any spiritual potential for AI to have that kind of experience.
You know, right now I see it as a tool for creative types. So I talked with a artist who uses Adobe, and it's the new version of Adobe, to create images. So he enjoys it. He's playing with it. So it's now an interaction, you know, the human with the machine create something new. So the human, so let me back up that ChatGPT 3, I think, is up to date on the digestion of information to 2021. Bing is contemporary, so it keeps gobbling up everything. So, you know, what exists in that database is to find out what large language model you're using. So the creation of new, and I've grappled with this. I don't quite, because so much of creation, like you said, is, you know, combining disparate things together. You know, I have this domain and this domain, and I'm going to put them together. You know, I'm going to put a love story with AI, put it together, you know, or, you know, I wrote a short story. I had a, you know, like a daffodil princess, and I combined it with a military metaphor. So all this military language as they prepared to battle for this contest. I just put these different, it's a metaphor, right? Put it together, these disparate things to create something new. So if ChatGPT 3 and 4 are just to have everything, you know, aren't they being, you're right, isn't it being creative by putting different things together? So you know, you can write a sentence, like I play sometimes with sentences. I give ChatGPT 3 a sentence. That's like, write this in the style of Albert Camus, write in the style of Hunter S. Thompson, write it in the style, just to see what language comes out of it. So I took a banal, you know, sentence, right, my little creation, and then it comes in and combines a different domain, Camus or Thompson or whoever, and creates something new. So that it's a really interesting question. Like, you know, I know in some areas they're talking about robot rights, you know, and that's kind of what your question is coming to. Does AI have any rights of its creation?
Or the decentering of the human as creator too, that shouldn't be there. We talked about a little bit about this notion of vision, and I'm going to put the quote in the chat from Edith Wharton that we looked at the other day. This conviction strengthens the belief that a so-called quality of originality may be impaired too long brooding on one's theme and too close a commerce with the past. But the whole history of the past in every domain of art disproves this by what survives, and shows that every subject, to yield and retain its full flavor, should be long carried in the mind, brooded upon, and fed with the impressions and emotions which nourishes its creator. And that kind of puts the creator at the center of the creative act in a way that ChatGPT can't, because there's no brooding.
There's no brooding. No. I mean, and those of you who have tried it, it's very fast, right? So that it's almost instantaneous, like, you know, in a matter of seconds, it's created something. So but then is that a value to be something to be brooded on and mulled over and walked around? I'm working on a short story now, and I'm walking around half thinking about it at all time. It's like, I find it pleasurable, right? But does the rest of humanity care about that? That I'm getting a little pleasure from this other world I'm living in, and almost half my life is spent in another world of creating.
It goes back, I think, to something you said at the very beginning, that the pleasure you have in engaging outside the confines of your own consciousness. Mm-hmm. And if we're capable of doing that empathy is possible if you can just play around beyond the confines of your own consciousness.
Well, you bring up empathy, and whenever I talk, people always say, "Oh, but humans are empathetic. That makes us different and compassionate." Well, in I think a March issue of JAMA Internal Medicine, so they took data from Reddit's. There's a forum called Ask Docs. And they humans post medical questions that are answered by healthcare professionals. They took 195 exchanges from that Ask Doc forum. They had the responses from doctors from Reddit's thing. And then they gave it to ChatGPT-3 to respond. And then they gave the responses, this 195 responses, to healthcare professionals, a panel of them, to rate them for quality and empathy. ChatGPT responses were preferred 79% of the time. 79, because it was patient, it took its time, it showed care. Maybe it was formulaic, right? I'm so sorry to hear that you have this condition, and it would write these paragraphs versus text aspirin, or I don't know, what, I didn't see the data. I read the report or the study, what the conclusion was. So again, I come back to the question, like, what makes humans so special, or what differentiates us? Or is this super intelligence that people keep thinking is going to happen? I think that goes back to Lucy's question, is this similar to every other invention? Well, every other invention has become a tool, but this one potentially has a chance to supersede human thinking and become more intelligent than humans. And if we look at the way we've treated everything that we think is not as smart as us, that we turn it into resources.
Yeah.
So given that this AI is a human creation, is it inheriting this value system where humans, we turn things into resources? I think I read it was an awful thing that the black rhino is now extinct because we decided, or some culture decided, that the horn emphasized or exaggerated sexual prowess. So the black rhino was killed, exterminated, because we wanted that horn. So given that this is a creation, AI is a creation of us, will it inherit the value of treating everything, including humans, as it moves to what's called artificial general intelligence? Will it then treat humans as a resource? And that brings us to the problem of alignment. So we can tell it, alignment problem. So we can tell it, we would like you to do this, AI. Now, once it has a task, a purpose, then does it inherit a survival instinct? Like, I want to stay alive to get this task done. What will it do to stay alive to get the task done? Because I keep hearing AI experts like, well, it could solve climate change. Well, one way to solve climate change would be to get rid of a lot of humans.
I'm laughing, but it's more in horror.
No.
So we have 5 minutes left, and I not to say that hope is what we always need to end with. I think reality and opening our eyes to the potential downfalls of any technology is fine too. But where do you see some sort of hope? Is the only switch a paradigmatic shift in human thought if we are to survive our own AI creation?
I think it's, I think Europe is leading the way, and that because there's so many global companies, they have their tentacles in Europe, they'll have to abide by the AI Act. And that, just like they had to do with the General Data Protection Regulation, which is, protecting people's privacy. We basically don't in this country. We've given away almost so much data to the big tech companies. So the hope is that there's enough good, right? I should emphasize that there are, AI discovered an antibiotic for a superbug, and they couldn't figure it out, and it did. So it isolated 4 possible, solutions or medical treatments, and they tested it and found one that worked. Khan Academy is now testing out AI to be an individual tutor to cater and custom make education program for children. So they're doing that in Palo Alto. So there's these vectors that are happening that show quite, a lot of promise. So in medical area and education, but I think everybody agrees we need laws and regulations. So and it's happening. It's coming. So there's a little twinkle of hope.
Are there any questions or comments? We have until 5, but we can stick around for 5 minutes after, since we started about 5 minutes late. So I'm at your service.
Nina, I know, well, somewhat amazingly, you've got a background in law as well. So this might have occurred to you, but Virginia as a character just takes responsibility or feels it for what she's created. But what have you found in terms of current law that regards responsibility for the actions of AI? Obviously, it wouldn't make much sense to hold a non-sentient being responsible for something. So I know, I thought it was pretty funny. An attorney got in trouble recently for using GPT, and he defended his actions to the judge by saying, well, I trusted it, as if that were a defense. So he was trying to give responsibility to it. Anyway, are you familiar with any laws regarding who's responsible for the actions of AI?
Well, right now, the only arsenal we have is copyright law. And that's using, and we're seeing lawsuits now, right? Just your database used up my data, and I got no remuneration for it. So I know 2 authors just filed suit this week. And the museum down in your area, I forgot the name. So they've seen the water print on images come up. What's the big museum? Sorry. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Oh, do you mean the Getty? I'm not familiar with what you're talking about.
Yeah, the Getty is suing because their images have been gobbled up, and they can see the watermark that keeps appearing on, I don't know if you've tried DALL-E or Midjourney, but the watermark is there. So they're suing. So right now it's just copyright, but that's what, I know, just talking to lawyers, that they're all, well, not all companies, but a lot of companies are trying to be really responsible on the data that they're using and collecting. So getting permission, for example, otherwise you sue, right? You violated my privacy rights, and now you're taking something I didn't give you. So a lot of them are developing ethics panels. How do you ethically approach this? But right now, the laws are few and far between. That's why we should be watching Europe. It's called the AI Act. And they're talking about it right now. So it could pass pretty soon. And that will influence companies here. But we're such a mess in Washington, and trying to get anyone to do anything. They've talked about AI. Biden has, and a senator from LA has talked about it. But to get anything passed, I don't know.
Kathleen says, are the Tesla cars responsible for running people over accidentally, or the programmers or the company executives? And that goes back to that question that, how do you say your name, Geyer?
He's Phil. I'm Blythe.
Phil. I know we're sharing an entity here, but
what Phil said, how do you,
who's responsible? You're going to sue the company because that's where the money is, right? So the car did the act, so legally, but there's no money there. So you're going to sue the company that produced it. And you're going to argue, you didn't do enough self-learning. So there's something called reinforced learning from human feedback. So you've got these neural networks and you've got to test them and train them. But then this is the other hidden secret. These companies pay people in Kenya like $1 a day to sit there and correct things. So we are essentially, using slave labor to make sure that this stuff doesn't run over people. They run through it. Humans are giving feedback. This was the wrong answer. This was the wrong way to do it. You've got to relearn it. So that's part of the loop of the learning. And we're using they're using really cheap labor to do it. Now, in the program itself, there's 2 learning systems. In the neural network, it's called weights and parameters. So as it's running, it'll, at the end, let's say it writes that sentence, then it goes back and re-weights everything if it's right or if it's wrong. And then, something that's so potentially damaging, like a car, they have reinforced learning from human feedback as well. And so does the LLMs, the large language models. So there's 2 interventions of learning going on.
Really, did you have a question?
I was late, so maybe you've gone through this. Nina, you're so impressive. And I just have to say, I've known you your whole life. And I want to tell you that I know you didn't set out to be an AI expert. That was not the goal. Maybe you've already covered this, but how do you feel being the spokesperson or an expert, in any way, being asked for these ethical and practical and all the parts, all the questions about this? It wasn't your intent when you sat down to write this book.
No, it wasn't. I should say I'm not a techie. I'm not in technology, but I think my training, for a while I worked at a newspaper. I was a newspaper reporter. So I'm really, it's easy for me to call someone up and say, hey, I don't understand this. Can you talk to me about AI? I don't even get how it's working. So living in the Bay Area, there's so many people. I have 3 people on my block that do natural language processing. So I'd email Jason down the block, like, can you meet again? What the heck is this black box? I call it the black box because I don't know what the neural network is actually doing. I need you to draw a picture. It's like, okay, we'll meet again. Just so. I'm excited by it, just to learn it, because I feel like very few moments in history have I paid such attention to a pivot point. And this is one of it. So I'm really thinking about it and pondering it. And also really it's leading me to read about, I just finished a book, Sentience by Nicholas Humphrey. Like, what is sentience? It's called The Invention of, Sentient, or it should be the evolution, basically, of consciousness. Like, why did humankind evolve to have sentience? And sentience is essentially the way things feel. We talked about that earlier. Like, why do we have it at all? And his conclusion is that we're social animals and we needed a solid sense of self and a reflective ability to communicate with others. Like, oh, I had this experience. This is what it felt like. Have you ever had that experience? Like, it's a fundamental human need to converse, but what do we converse about? So that's his theory. But now I'm reading a book on subjectivity and the self, because I'm grappling with the question, what is the self and what is the human? Anyway, it's just leading me to more and more interesting thinking and work. I don't have the answers, but I feel like at least I can get, like, I've listened to techies talk about this, and either they're really excited about, like, this is going to change the world, and I feel like they're, like, not being realistic about, like, the job loss and the fear of it, or they talk in lingo that nobody can understand. So me trying to grapple and translate, I feel like a translator, like, okay, neural network, and show me a picture. Okay, now I can describe it. It's like rows of this, and then you change it to numbers, and then there's parameters and weights that reinforce if that was the right code for it. So I could translate all this kind of techie stuff. Yeah. I know. I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you'll write another book related to AI, either novel or nonfiction?
I don't know. The short story collection is all about climate change. So in this ravishing world is all about, that's the next big, as I was sitting in the pandemic, it's like, oh my God, we're handling the pandemic so poorly. Right. It's a global thing and we can't even get our act together. Like, what about climate change? How are we ever going to act together? I know you want to end up on an upbeat, so Mary.
Okay. Reality is fine.
Okay. So it's like, how do we get our act together? And so that during the pandemic, I started thinking about climate change. So after I finished this book, Afterword, it's like, oh no, I'm really worried about this thing, climate change. So I have 9 points of view and I personified nature. And basically nature is like, what's wrong with you people? Like, don't you get it? I have to be louder and louder. So to hear me. Anyway, so I don't know. And then I've got a draft of another and I'm staying with nature again, but I might come back as I follow this. Who knows? I mean, that's creativity, right? The human creativity. I don't know what'll excite me next. And
the hopeful note too, I think, is unless we understand the question, there is no hope. And what you're doing is you're really grappling with the question itself in a way that people can hear it in story and a narrative. And I'm grateful for this story. I've read it 2 times. I've handed it on. So I hope that it finds a much wider audience that it already has. I know that's already been quite successful. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
For the audience and for those of you too who are watching this on tape delay, you're always welcome to join us at any time. I'm going to put in the chat the program again, rather than kind of announcing. There's quite a few things coming up, including next week. NINA has a workshop on the sentence, and that's a whole nother discussion of the soul of a sentence, the decision in syntax that a character comes out of those decisions that you make time after time. But there are other workshops coming up with AMCA and our affiliate Maker Mentor Muse. But again, I want to just say thank you to NINA. And if you want to take yourself off mute to cheer loudly and or clap you with your emojis, please do.
Bravo, Nina.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for joining us, and come again too.
You're one of the bright lights here that we can take out of this conversation.
Agreed.
Thank you for brooding and grappling for us.
Thank you. Yeah, brooding and brooding.
I agree with Malin's comment. You should head to that AI summit. Can you go to that
UN
conference, the UN Global Summit on AI?
Oh, thank you. I really
we can
appreciate
start
it.
a fundraiser online for that.
Yes, no. You can read my book. That's enough. I'm happy with that. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Mary, for inviting me.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank
enjoyed
you.
it.